I will joke 1 minute while Leigh is preparing. If you look at the monk there, this one, and if you look at me without any spectacles, and you put me the corresponding dress, it looks like my ancestor having been expelled from paradise. We do not know why. We wonder. When I was a kid, I was willing to be a priest. It has been refused by my mother. I cannot believe it. My mother was a good Catholic, etc. And 30 years later, she did tell me, I was willing to know if you were able to resist women. And in fact, I did not. I have to confess that I did not resist enough.
Well, since there are some trains and some planes to be catched, we should start, and it's my pleasure to give the floor to Leigh Hancher, who will tell us what we shall do next. So, Leigh, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I don't know if I can tell you what we should do next, but maybe I can make some suggestions based on what we've been able to discuss today. And some of the themes coming out of the workshop. This morning, when Jorge kicked off, he talked about what had happened when we first introduced liberalization and the changes that brought with it, many of which were not anticipated, and certainly we had very loosely worded provisions in directives that were really just a menu of options. Looking back to the first package. So today, when we look at the clean energy package and we look to see what can we add from this institution, and I am the director of the energy law area, and Jean-Michel asked me some 10 years ago if I would be his right arm, so I'm on your right still, and I very gratefully accepted that invitation. It's been great fun to work here. And one of the things that I've learned, especially when you get asked to do assessments of other institutions, which is, I suppose, a privilege of being old, is that there's no institutional memory in most institutions. Everybody forgets what we've already done, and we all start reinventing the wheel. And I think going forward, it's always quite important to look back and see what we learned and what kind of tools we could keep and what sort of things we have to throw out or refashion. And going forward from today, one of the interesting aspects, I think, is when we approach this issue of governance and what we expect from governance at the local level. When we're not just talking about the energy transition, we're talking about climate change and the role of the energy sector in delivering both adaptation and mitigation. And I think everybody agrees that that has to happen at the local level, that leadership at local level is really important to get people, not just to get people to buy in to the transition, to feel that they're part of it and can contribute meaningfully and get something out. But what I've understood from studies in the area is that one of the golden rules of both adaptation and mitigation is not to get too far ahead. That if you start frightening people about the effects of climate change, they will just throw their hands in the air and give up. So you need to stay close to the local communities, and you need to have leadership skills, which we heard today, but you also have to have the skills that encourage what they call in the States followship. So you don't just need leadership, you need followship. And so how can we contribute to that? Many of us in this room have been involved in the market for many years. Many of us are lawyers, for better or worse. And many of us have been involved in the regulation of the sector. So there's a lot of expertise and knowledge, I think, that you can bring to this new governance area. And I think you could see it very much as a platform. It should be seen as a platform, that you can bring a lot of skills and a lot of knowledge from the past as well as future-looking skills onto that platform. And thinking on the theme of institutional history, I took from a presentation. Last year we organized a seminar in Milan on the clean energy package, and this was a presentation given on one of the themes that we heard about today: energy efficiency, the role of public buildings. But also what was really important in this presentation was the emphasis on public-private participation, which we touched a little bit on today, and to what extent we need guidance to encourage that, to identify where the obstacles are. Simple obstacles like the accounting principles of Eurostat can discourage this, because it goes on the books of the local authorities that they have this debt when they're involved in public-private partnerships. Now, I believe that is about to change. It has changed, it has just changed. But things like that are important, I think, that there's a mechanism that we remember that these are there. These obstacles and can be removed. And another thing that came out of that presentation, which I thought was also very important for our discussions, was, and it was touched upon in the EIB presentation, energy performance contracts. And these are sophisticated instruments that are vital in the process of obtaining finance for a lot of these local initiatives. And interestingly, and this is what I recalled, this presentation went into some detail on how to structure these EPCs, and they had, the person gave a presentation as to how they had worked in various municipalities to develop these EPCs. So there is a great deal of expertise within this institution that we've gathered through past seminars that I think that would be very important to put into this platform. And I think that when we look at governance in the sector, what's really important is to consider that we're talking not just about governance, public institutions, but how important participation of all stakeholders, including consumers and prosumers, energy users, is going to be. And there, and I'm perhaps thinking a little bit as a lawyer, but there I think that one of the ways that one can build trust, and I think that that's a really important part of this transition, is to get and keeping everybody on board. People have to trust each other, is actually through the old-fashioned instrument of contracts, which provide a kind of a social and legal glue, if you like, for many of the activities that we've been talking about today. And going forward, I think there'll be a big role to develop standardized contracts that can be used with ease, whether they're framework contracts to help people set up local energy communities or citizen energy communities, to sell energy back to the grid, smart contracts, dynamic contracts. The clean energy package is full of all these new phrases, and to give meaning to these concepts, I think the kind of platform that one could develop, a governance platform, you could bring in a lot of expertise to help encourage the dissemination of those types of instruments. And if I think back to the first phase of energy market transition, the liberalization of the energy market, one of the most important factors of change was the development of power exchanges, which was not foreseen in the legislation. That was a market initiative and backed by standardized trading contracts. To be eligible to trade in these power exchanges, you had to use a standardized contract that was developed in the market. So there's, I think, a really important precedent that we should learn from, to discover new ways of contributing to this new governance. It's not the only way. There are many other aspects, but as I say, if you conceive of what one could provide from this institution together with the Association of Energy Lawyers, it seems to me that could be a very important and fairly innovative contribution. Because looking at the literature, there are many networks, and we've heard about the networks today, the Covenant of Mayors and the network of cities. There's the European Innovation Partnership, which is also has a marketplace for ideas, which you could bring on board, but you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's already all that expertise out there. And I think the key is to identify what could we bring. What could be the additional value that an organization, an institution like ours could contribute, given your association's aims as well. And I thought this was an area that I thought could be useful. And you touched upon it in your last slide this morning, the importance going forward of putting this kind of contractual behavior, if you like, contracting and I think in the picture. We also heard in some of the last presentations the importance of procurement, which again, of course, is carried out through fairly exacting contractual frameworks. So contracts are a very important part of public-private governance, which is essential to this sector. So these are some ideas that I would like to throw out for discussion as to where one could go to develop a new governance platform, and this would be one input, by no means the only one, into this type of platform. So that was my first.
Thank you, Leigh. So let's have some comments. Jean-Michel.
I did lose the sheet of paper I was preparing. But I remember one issue Leigh did open, which is public-private, and a particular subset of it, because what is a cooperative? Is it a public or private? So we have to rethink this. We have also to rethink for-profit, non-for-profit, because as excellently said by José, if public authorities have the skills, they can discipline the for-profit and therefore welcome on board. But also citizens can invest, which is true, and why not? And I was even saying at the coffee break to Josh, I would like myself to invest, even in solar in Paris, which is not easy, but I think we do. And also, I would like to investigate more 3 or 4 other things, but I cannot remember when I did put this down paper. So I do apologize for this, but I deeply understood from the day, and particularly for my panel, of course, because I was able to drive it, that we have to understand that the local level is very diverse regarding the energy sources it can tap, which is logical, because energy sources, of course, at local level can be very diverse. Also that the needs at local level can also be very diverse. And then we know that the roles given by constitution, we may say, or national habits to local authority is pretty different from one region, one area to the other. And then rest the role of the political will that Jose did exemplify very well. All of this being said, Jorge was true to say that we have to put all of this on the table, including the cooperatives, including what Holger said excellently, which is citizens individual by themselves, because we do not know how many of them, but 10, 15, 20% can become very active. Out of 500 million, shit, it makes a lot of people. Huh? So all of this has to be open. What is the governance frame which permits this? It is still open, because I do not know, but I know that we have to either invent or to discover step by step what will be the governance frame permitting all of this, which is framing private initiative when it is possible, pushing collective initiatives from individuals, individual initiatives from individuals, and permitting to all these forces to do better for humanity. This has to be invented. I do not know how. And I count on Jorge to have more ideas than me, because he's thinking about it since several years. Me, I'm thinking about it since July last year, when Jorge did open the box and say, Jean-Michel, you have to look at it, it's key for the future.
Well, thank you very much for having opened the box. Your story reminded me of another story of a good friend, also a good friend of mine, who is a professor, and he was invited one day to give a lecture. And he is as bright as Jean-Michel, but had no time to prepare his lecture. So he just took, some papers that he had on the table, and he went to the lecture hall and gave a brilliant lecture, and everybody was amazed by that. And so at the end, the organizers came to see him and asked him the permission to publish the lecture. And he said, well, I'm sorry, but no, I'm not very happy. I have to improve it. And so the organizer said, no, it doesn't matter. Just give us your manuscript. We will print it. So sometimes it's dangerous to go with manuscripts into the meeting rooms. You didn't need the manuscript. Your recommendations are very clear. So Miguel, what's from your side can we hear at this point?
So when Jorge approached me together, when he approached Jean-Michel with the idea of organizing this seminar, whose purpose will then be to try to set up a more ambitious and comprehensive project that will focus notably on questions of governance, of multi-level governance in this context of energy, and a particular concern with the role of local authorities. I told them that on one hand we were, and we still are, very willing to participate and be engaged in such a project. But on the other hand, there was expertise that the school lacks. So contrary to the Florence School of Regulation, the School of Transnational Governance doesn't focus on energy. We do have as one of our clusters of activities climate change that's going to be starting now, and it's going to be directed by Jos Delbecq, that has been at the European Commission responsible for the area of environment, and notably one of the persons that coordinated the negotiation of the Paris Agreement. And I think that that's certainly some of the expertise that we can make available, the people that will be working on our climate change cluster, together with the expertise that already exists in the Florence School of Regulation in the area of energy, and with additional expertise that we might be able to gather if we manage indeed to get the funds to have a more sustainable and long-term project on this. In addition to that, I realized today that in terms of expertise, there is two other things that we might come to contribute. One is our more general expertise on issues of governance, matters such as accountability. One cluster that we have is transnational politics and democracy, so the issues that are related to how you develop forms of governance that relate these different levels of decision-making, and how do you develop these forms of governance in an accountable way and in a way that legitimates it. It's something where we can certainly support whatever work will come to be done. And the third that I realize even more, to somehow, not to my surprise, I would say, because it's present on a lot of things, but I didn't expect it to be so present in this topic as I've just noticed, and even has been talked about in the previous session, is the question of social innovation. Particularly, that's a question that I've worked a lot, and we, myself and other people, have expertise on the move from outcomes from outputs to outcomes, on formulas of pay for success. Even now we have these performance contracts, it's basically that, on the use of bonds to basically try to gather private financial resources and put them at the service of the provision of public goods. That is one of the ways that I think we can develop. We have expertise, not in the areas of energy, but we have expertise on that, and we can somehow mobilize that expertise to help in projects in the area of energy that make use of those instruments and that knowledge. And moreover, in that area we are setting up, hopefully, in the stages of finding additional funding for it, policy innovation and outcomes metrics lab. And I'm sure that this lab can play an important role in the relationship with whatever project will be developed in this area. And in fact, energy might be one of the areas where we can test and where this lab may work and develop. We are also in the process of setting up a network that will try to relate the role of local authorities with transnational governance. We'll have another meeting involving local authorities in a few weeks in here. And I think some of you that participated in here might also then be involved in this network and be involved in that project. I think the area of energy might be one of those where this network might come to play a role. So there's a variety of ways in which I think what we are intending to do and what we're working on at the School of Transnational Governance might be useful for a project in this area, might contribute for a project in this area, even if, as I said at the start, we do not have expertise on energy itself, and to some extent we shouldn't, because the right unit to think about energy is the Florence School of Regulation here at the UI. In addition to that, we have a series of resources and administrative resources, and we have a wonderful building from next year downtown, a beautiful palace of 22,000 square meters for the School of Transnational Governance, close to the Duomo. And that's something that we can make available also to, if this project indeed does take off, as I think we all hope that it will take. So I think both in terms of providing that expertise and both in terms of organizing and facilitating training, the School of Transnational Governance is very willing and ready to play a role if indeed a project can be developed that includes these different dimensions that have been talked about in here, developing a code of practice, in developing a governance model for these issues and involving local authorities, and conceiving of trainings that will be a product of those initial 2 steps in the project. I do hope that it will be possible to develop this project, and as I said, the School of Transnational Governance is very willing to play a role in it.
Well, thank you to all of you 3, and also to Vicente and to the European Federation of Energy Law Associations for the offers that have been done. Before giving you the floor for comments and suggestions and proposals, let me just very briefly add a note. I think that the European Commission back in 2016, when the clean package was prepared, did an excellent job in many respects, independently of the judgment that you may give about the output in terms of legislation. But there were at least 2 important novelties and 2 important points in the approach taken by the European Commission back in 2016. One was the fact that for the first time we had many sectors taken at the same time. We had buildings, mobility, gas, electricity. For the first time it was realized in the Berlaymont that having a climate and energy policy requires a different way of considering the different sectoral policies, and it's impossible to have an integrated climate and energy policy if mobility, buildings, electricity, and so on and so forth work separately. So bringing together all these energy and emissions related sectors and creating a common framework for joint work was indeed a big achievement, and I'm sure that this approach will not go back with the next Commission, whoever the next commissioners will be, because everybody realized that this is the way to go forward, that this is the necessary approach to an integrated climate and energy policy. The second novelty was the fact that the Commission did not just work on a legislative package. In the past, with the first, the second, and the third packages, it was all about legislation, directives and regulations. And this time, the Commission was very explicit about it. It's more than legislation. It involves innovative financing mechanisms, and the EIB was particularly involved in this political process between the Commission and the financial institutions. So that's why we have now so many new mechanisms for funding and for blending, as it was shown earlier today. But also non-legislative mechanisms like the Eurostat topic that was mentioned by Leigh, which was indeed a very important barrier for municipalities to engage in so-called ESCO contracts or energy performance contracts. This has been solved through a political dialogue between the Commission and the Eurostat, and it is now settled. So this has created new opportunities, not only for the municipalities, but also indeed for all these new kinds of companies. But although the Commission has achieved a lot, they could not do all that they would like to do and all that is necessary to do to modernize our sector and to reach our goals. And and every commission has a limited period of time. So there is a lot of things to be done, to be improved. And when I was somehow involved in this process back in 2016, it became very clear for me that this topic that we have discussed today, the governance of the local landscape, was very weak in the package. This is the new frontier that needs to be further elaborated, and we need to work on this. So that's the reason why I suggested some time ago to both Jean-Michel and Miguel that they together, bringing their own specific expertises, work together on this topic, together with the stakeholders, of course, because this kind of project only makes sense if there is a commitment and the will of some directly interested stakeholders, and in particular some municipalities. So that was the background, and thank you for having joined us today in this exercise. I hope that you enjoyed the discussions, and I still hope that you will give us further food for thought and maybe some useful suggestions, mainly to the EUI, about how they could proceed, how we could proceed together along this line, if you feel that this is something useful for you in your daily life, in this process of democratizing and not just decarbonizing our energy sectors. So all comments are welcome before the bus takes you back to the downtown or to the airport. Who wants to start? José, Paulo?
Thank you for putting together this workshop. It's been interesting. Combining different expertise from city planning in the frame of energy and climate change to the issue of the new energy package and the cooperatives and the prosumer, which are not really 100% aligned, but it's they're part of a solution to more general issues like you mentioned, for example, energy performance contracting, financing. So there is a lot of material that's been presented, so which makes this workshop very, very challenging and interesting. Maybe what is needed at this stage is to understand what is the frame around this proposal in mind, if it's just governance of energy and climate at the local level, or what they call it more generally multi-level governance, or is more related to governance of the energy system, which was discussed in the last session after lunch, which has its own peculiarity in terms of responsibility. I mean, the thesis, you know better than most probably anybody else in Europe, how the energy system, the electricity system is peculiar, as its own technical constraints and rules that makes it work as a fantastic system, but very delicate system. You should not play. So I guess other systems like transportation or telecom or even the gas system is a bit different from the electricity system. So what I want to take away from this workshop, in addition to the very interesting presentation and exchange of ideas, is to understand how you will frame this, I guess, research project, if it's, or initiative that you have in mind, if it's really multi-level governance for the climate and energy transition, or if it's more related just to electricity sectors and the specific rules.
Thank you. Any further comments or suggestions? Ilaria?
Okay. Yes, well, to answer your questions, George, yes, I think it's a great idea, but of course I'm working for the Florence School of Regulation. My opinion is a bit on your side, of course. And to add more input to this proposal, I think that today we mainly discussed about electricity, but also on the gas sector, on the gas side, there are several developments. We are at a very key transitional period. So I would say regarding the two Ds that you mentioned, decarbonization and democratization, the gas sector was never too ready for democratization. Let's say it's a new word that appeared in the gas sector, but will certainly find its way through, because we know that at least in the project of the European Commission, there is more and more space in the gas sector for projects like sector coupling, for power to gas, and so on. So by all means, we will get to a more local level also in the gas sector. And at the end of the day, the gas sector was not too ready either for decarbonization, for the other D. So again, it's a new challenge, and I think it's really worth exploring.
Thank you. Please.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for organizing this. I'm not sure whether it's the right time, but I'd like to bring in something relating to the third kind of stream of your proposal, the providing training for the involved decision makers and stakeholders. I and some others here have been contemplating actually applying for a Horizon 2020 grant on call for supporting public authorities to implement the Energy Union, which is a coordination and support action type of grant, so no research grant. So the idea is that that the knowledge is available, but you simply have to coordinate and support a bit. Not all knowledge is available, as we know right now, but still. And I think possible collaboration between some of us here in the room could actually help to somehow give some shape to that third proposal where it's about providing training, as this call explicitly asks for peer-to-peer learning programs targeting cities and regions with the idea to help them deliver the Energy Union. So what this exactly would be, I mean, it's something to explore. But I just wanted to raise this as a possible opportunity in order to give shape to part of your proposals. At least, I mean, there are proposals here on paper. I mean, so that is something that I, from the University of Tilburg, have been interested in, and I know some others in the room. But I think hereafter we can discuss this. I mean, if you have time, you don't have to catch a train or a plane. We can briefly discuss this in 8 minutes from now.
Just add a small point that we had a chance of circulating the proposals to publish in the FSA website and make a sort of poll and ask people to see and to click what they think was most important for local authorities. So I think it was converging from what we discussed now, and between the three proposals, that is developing a comprehensive energy governance framework, providing training and establishing a voluntary code. 65% vote about developing a comprehensive energy governance framework, and 50% training, and 15% only on code. So you could clearly see that what the Leigh presentation and what has been discussed here, it was perfectly coherent what is needed, which is comprehensive energy governance framework and training to operate it. This comprehensive. And just to perhaps to conclude a point, it's curious because in 90s, when it comes to the debate between lawyers, 90s the key word was fragmentation, and now the key word is coupling. So the idea that markets would work, the markets would be fragmented and people would be specialized was a key idea of 90s, has been discussed, and now the coupling is exactly what you needed. A new governance is to have a finance, transportation, climate, energy together, and it requires efforts from the school and from the scholarship to broaden the scope of the research and training. So thank you.
Yes, I think the approach of standard contracts is very powerful. When I was at the exchange, I was drafting standard contracts, and I've seen the power of the instrument, because you have to anticipate on potential issues that are not there yet, and you have to agree in advance with your counterparts. That's and the third thing is when there are new sectors developing, there is standardization within ISO. So agreeing on what we talk about, how we name it, and agreeing that we have many, not so many options, but a number of options that we frame and we list, then it means that in the sector, people don't waste time later on discussing about the rules. So I think the standard contracts is a very interesting route.
Thank you, Jorge.
Just general remarks. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for the organization and the subject. It's very. I think the big challenge for me, in order to prepare for this in a little, well, the mindset was it was very comprehensive, very complex, very abstract. So I'm with Paolo. What's the frame of it? And the second problem for me was the clean energy package. It's 8 legislative acts, 4 directives, 4 regulations, and I'm expert in some articles in some of these acts. And there's a lot more. There's the effort sharing regulation, very interesting for the non-ETS sector. I'm not really sure, and it's creating a lot of pressure on Germany. I think they were not aware of that, but it is creating pressure like hell. If the impact of the CEP is or can be clear enough for your project, because there's a lot in it, very, very detailed, even though there might be some vague legal terms, but it is quite far-reaching in a lot of sectors. So that would be an interesting subject to be able to foresee what the CEP delivers already, and maybe there's not so much left to take care of. There is a lot, local authorities, but it is a big one. It's a big package, and it will tackle a lot. So it would be important to have that in mind and to guarantee that there is no work done in vain, because this is at least addressed in the clean energy package. And then it's a huge one. So we have some experts in one directive or in one regulation. Maybe there's somebody who oversees all of it. I don't think so. So the impact of the CEP should be considered when you are, even the very small prosumers, when they play an important role, it should be all known. So that would be
good point.
Interesting.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Vicente.
First, congratulations to the Florence School of Regulation and the School of Transnational Governance, and thank you very much for the possibility to be here on behalf of EFELA. If I would take if I consider a kind of a takeaways, I would put it in these 5 chapters. That it combines energy law with the I do hope with the interest of another more enlarging stakeholders. I would say governance and principles, because I think at the end of the day we need a clear set of principles applicable to everybody, to all the different technology services and subsectors. Governance or for energy services platform, governance and energy communities, governance and financial instruments for clean energy, and governance and energy contracts. For me, these different chapters it would be the most interesting places were working in, as Lucila was saying, in this training exercise. I think the scope that it provides to us for work together, for cooperate, and also for training and education. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vicente, for all the support and the contributions. Jorge?
Yeah, maybe just a couple of additional remarks. I think moving forward in whatever form this work takes place, I think there are a couple of considerations that are worth mentioning. To add to what Vicente said, I think not just principles of governance, but principles of good governance. I think this is, we can identify this. There's tons of academic literature on this. And I think in the additional context of decision-making, this is incredibly important because a lot of the legal and the technical provisions will inevitably find themselves in more abstract or concrete, but decision-making processes which will bring together all stakeholders. And I think elucidating what are good governance principles of these decision-making processes could be very helpful. And I think also just to reiterate a sort of common understanding of what some of these concepts are, because they are very new. The different actors, you know, what is a renewable energy community? What is a citizen energy community? What is an active customer? What is a self-consumer? Some of these things, I think it's important that as everybody moves forward, they at the very least have a common conception of what they are. Otherwise, we might be talking about completely different things.
Well, thank you very much. Then, Leigh, I'll give you the last word.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for all your suggestions and for your input, and also for the poll results from the online listeners. Governance is one of those concepts that's very slippery, and I think it's very difficult to define. And then we add multi-level and transnational and all the many, many dimensions that the concept can take on. So I think going forward, it's very useful to start with a fairly concrete proposition as to what one wants to achieve. And I think it's very good to have the feedback that we just had in terms of developing principles of good governance, decision-making, and the role of the different instruments that we could use. I think that's where also the training aspects come in, the expertise that we have at the Florence School and at the Transnational Governance Institute, where that can also be brought to bear on this complex moving target. But I think from what I've heard, there's a consensus that we need something, that it would be a worthwhile initiative to develop, that we could add value, and that certainly it's worthwhile to explore with other partners how we can take the concept further in the coming months from all the organizations that are represented here. So thank you very much.
Okay, so there are two buses now, one going to the train station and one directly to the airport. So if you would like to follow my colleague. Thank you.